Hey now, RotoGrinders, welcome to episode 6 of Stonk Watch, where we will examine the best ball fantasy football marketplace in the context of ADP and investing. My name is Chris Gimino. I am joined by Kyle Murray. Kyle, all of the beat writers are in full force out there reporting on training camp, which just launched into play just before we joined this show. Are you ready to start talking about some actual market movement as training camp moves along?
Yeah, so this is actually a pretty important time for fantasy football in general, just because of the fact that it's we're getting a lot of news, and we have to sort of sift through what's real and what's kind of just surface level stuff that might not necessarily carry a lot of water coming into the regular season. So we're going to be getting a ton of news and information over the course of these next few weeks, and it's kind of like playing deal or no deal, deciding which is real and what is not.
On screen right now, rotogrinders.com YouTube page. Check us out, like and subscribe. I have got 10 players on the screen right now that we are going to talk about in terms of their recent market movements, both up and down. And Kyle, you are going to tell me whether or not you are buying or selling what the market is putting out there in terms of their movement. Which direction are you going on each of these players? Getting started with one of the very best players to ever play the game, Patrick Mahomes. His ADP is moving up. Based on what I am seeing out there on the Twitter machine. Quite frankly, I don't have any problem with what the market is doing here. What do you feel about what you're seeing on Patrick Mahomes' movement going up? Everything looks bullish to me.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think we're going to continue to get a lot of Mahomes and just Kansas City hype in general. Obviously, they're coming off of a Super Bowl season. They've acquired some interesting pieces as well from a passing perspective. So I think it's going to continue to go up in terms of the hype for Mahomes. I don't think we'll see his ADP shoot up a ton because he's a quarterback, and I feel like quarterbacks ADP they stabilize a little bit more. But just in general, I'm going to continue to buy on Mahomes. It's been a spot that we've been talking about all draft season, liking. Whether you like Hollywood Brown or Xavier Worthy or Travis Kelce, there's tons of spots to like here in Kansas City. So I'm going to continue to buy.
You used to have a chance to get him in round 5. I don't think those days are going to be very frequent here in the future as we get into the August portion of draft season. So you're going to be paying, quite frankly, what I don't think is actually that high of a price at all for him. I think he was in previous season going even a little bit higher than this. And I think that he could end up having one of those kind of seasons, Kyle. I mean, you think back to the Peyton Manning kind of seasons of yesteryear. We haven't seen a whole ton of those recently. I think he could absolutely have a chance at 40 plus touchdowns, massive amount of passing yards. Just looks real good there in Kansas City to me. So hopefully that's right. I'm going to draft him a bunch. Let's talk about Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is up, and of course, Brandon Ayuk is down. I think we can look at this situation and kind of obviously understand why the market is moving in this direction. But what is your current feeling on the 49ers situation?
Yeah, honestly, it's definitely a murky situation with Ayuk, sort of his just involvement with the team coming into the season being up in the air. But I'm going to continue to buy on Ayuk, especially if his ADP falls. I know that there is some uncertainty there, but I think from a best ball perspective, there's probably not a ton of scenarios where he's not playing this season or not playing X amount of games. I think he's going to be playing the majority of the season, if not the entire season. I do think there's a little bit of a question mark, maybe where he plays them or, when I guess he gets onto the field. And we've seen in the past guys become affected by, their lack of involvement in training camp and they lead to bad seasons. For a name that pops up is, Josh Jacobs from last year. But I think Ayuk's a tremendous talent. I'm going to be buying on Ayuk. Deebo Samuel is more of a neutral spot for me. I definitely prefer Ayuk in this offense for the 49ers, but there's plenty of room to say, okay, if Ayuk's gone, that's a huge boost for Deebo. But I don't know if I want to buy on that price because at the end of the day, I still do think that Ayuk's going to be a 49er this season.
How about the Buffalo Bills wide receiver situation? Kyle, we've got Curtis Samuel moving up the board right now. And of course, there is not a whole lot of certainty as to how this is going to shake out for the Bills in terms of, somebody in this offense is probably going to be good with Josh Allen as the quarterback. The question is it Curtis Samuel?
Yeah, and honestly, it's a tough question. I've been looking for some sort of inspiration to figure out who I'm going to like. And at the end of the day, I just keep coming back to Dalton Kincaid. So that's kind of where I'm at. I still think Kincaid's the number one guy. I think Kincaid's going to lead this team in targets. After that, it's kind of a mix of Keon Coleman, Shakir, and then Curtis Samuel, who's kind of going to be the guy to separate there. I think Coleman's going to be the explosive playmaker, but Shakir and Samuel, they kind of have similar play styles, right? They can be the underneath guy, and we've seen that player succeed in this Buffalo offense with Josh Allen plenty of times before. So I don't mind taking a stance on maybe saying you want to get one of Samuel or Shakir in lineups with or on teams with Josh Allen there, especially if you're pairing them up with Kincaid or Keon Coleman. But at the end of the day, I just keep coming back to Kincaid as the number one guy here.
In Underdog best ball drafts, I do find myself getting to Shakir more than Curtis Samuel. I think that the discount in 10, 12 spots is really helping me do that. And I'm not seeing, at least from a projectable volume standpoint, it's not very easy to separate those two. So I have been going for the cheaper guy. But I do see that Curtis Samuel, with his skill profile, could just as easily be the guy who succeeds. So it's an ambiguous situation, as they call it. And it's a situation that I do think that no matter which way that you are in terms of being right or being wrong, you do want to try to take a stab at this in best ball drafts, at least from my perspective, because I do believe there's going to be a clear winner by the end of the season. Now, let's talk about Evan Ingram, a player that I've previously stated that I am very bullish on in this best ball season. He is moving up the board. I saw him go in a draft, very early today. Are you with the field and buying Evan Ingram as he starts to move up just a little bit closer to those round 5 tight ends? I mean, I know you were getting him 75, 76, 77, maybe into the 80s in previous weeks, and now we're starting to pay, mid 70s or more consistently. Are you buying Evan Ingram at this price?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to really, at this point, sell on Ingram just because I'm pretty high on this Jacksonville offense. I will say he's always been a key stacking component with Lawrence. And obviously there are guys like Kirk and even Brian Thomas that you can make stacks with. But Ingram, I still think he's one of those guys that's kind of being, even though his ADP is going up, he's still not really considered by the majority as able to compete in some of these spots with some of these tight ends. But I think that there's plenty of reason for him to, right? It's now a spot where you're looking at a team where he's in his second year with Trevor Lawrence, and now he's going to be able to potentially compete for the vacated targets that Calvin Ridley left and the potential red zone work that Calvin Ridley left. Sure, Brian Thomas is going to step in, but it's hard to expect him to step into a role that Calvin Ridley had last year. So I think there's room for growth here for Ingram. Me and you have talked about it a lot. We think this team's going to be very pass heavy. That's only going to benefit Ingram, who I think has a lot of upside.
All right, let's talk about Audric Estime. Now, the Denver Broncos running back situation, this is not the first time we've talked about it, Kyle. I think that there have been some reports out there of Javonte Williams' demise, potentially competing with Samaje Perine for one last roster spot. Kyle, we know that there's some other information out there now that training camp has started to the contrary. Where the hell do we go with this? Where are you leaning? It's Sean Payton, after all. Can you believe a word he says? What's happening here with the Broncos backfield? And are you buying Audric Estime as he rises up the board towards the back end of drafts?
Yeah, well, so I think I think both things can exist here. In terms of Javonte Williams not being cut from the team and Audric Estime also still being on the rise and that being still a good buy. There's plenty of ways where this plays out to where Estime is the number one guy or just wins out the job at some point in the year. Javonte Williams gets hurt, banged up, whatever it may be. But again, like we talked about it a few shows ago where, when we're getting reports that Javonte Williams is going to be cut, I mean, I will say I kind of fell for it later on, but at the beginning, it did feel like it was completely just smoke. And I'm going to trust what a reporter has seen, while we're actually getting practice reps in. So I think Javonte Williams is going to make the team. Like you see on the screen there, he took number one reps there. So I don't think he's going to make the team. I think Perine's the obvious player to cut here, but I do think Estime can still potentially vie for an important role in this offense. So I still have no problem buying Estime at this spot in his ADP, but you can also, believe that not either of these things are mutually exclusive, where Estime can still have a role in fantasy football while Javonte Williams is still on the team.
Yeah, pretty tough situation to dissect, but as of now, what we're seeing in camp is Williams is still getting his opportunity to earn his spot, and I don't think that is, there's something to be said for the coach saying that he likes that he's dropped weight, right? That's something that's happened over the offseason is Javonte Williams has dropped weight. He mentioned that he had watched tape alongside Williams and pointed to his college tape and said, hey, can you get to that weight? And that's what Williams has done. So certainly Sean Payton likes his ego stroked, and that's what's happening here with Javonte Williams, looking pretty good at the early part of camp. Now, to the downside, T. Higgins, uh, obviously some tumult with him as it relates to his contract situation. He is showing up to Bengals camp, with Joe Burrow's blonde hair and all. So what's the situation here for T. Higgins in your mind? Are you buying T. Higgins as he drops down the board? I think I saw him at like 40, 45 last time I looked.
Yeah, honestly, like in terms of stuff on social media, I don't really think that there's anything that would qualify him to be, dropping, but he is. So I'm going to continue to buy in this price. Cincinnati offense has been a team that we've been on in general from the beginning. And honestly, it's a spot where their prices keep getting better or they, keep staying the same. So I'm gladly taking up all the shares in this Bengals offense that I can. And, T. Higgins is an important part of that team and especially important part of a stack there. If you miss out on Jamar Chase, you almost certainly want to get T. Higgins there. So yeah, plenty of ways to use T. Higgins at this price, and I will gladly take him if his price is falling.
Okay, what about Cortland Sutton? Similar situation, contract situation was till today previously unsettled. His price tag has been dropping as a result. However, we did get a report today that this has been settled. Cortland Sutton, $15 million maximum this season with the 1.5 new in incentives. So what's the deal? Cortland Sutton, you buy in as it drops here? Why aren't we interested in a player that you're drafting at almost pick 100?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough to say sell for me on Sutton because I mean he is a guy who's going to be the number one receiver in an offense that I don't think is going to be all that great. But again, like there's a lot of unknowns, which could sometimes lean, when you lean into variance, that could turn into something that is helpful. So that is kind of working for him actually, in my opinion, because I think a lot of people are sort of taking these unknowns and just sort of ignoring him. But one thing that we do know is that he should be pretty involved in this offense. Now, how good the offense is going to be is another question. It's a spot where I'm not getting overly excited because it's still this Denver passing game that I'm not too thrilled about. But it's definitely tough to sell on a wide receiver one who is very easy to draft.
Yeah, like I said, you're drafting him at the very tail end of like where you're getting any kind of wide receiver one on Underdog Fantasy right now. So take advantage of the discount if you can. If you can get him cheaper than 95, which is his average draft position, all the better. I think that you're going to be able to find that in certain situations right now. Okay, another situation that a player just in free fall today. I don't know if it's going to stay like this, Kyle, but I drafted him at like 180 today, literally like 180, and his ADP is 148. Talking about Kendre Miller. Now, the reason for this is pretty simple. Dennis Allen came out and said, you can't make the team in the training room. And to boot, if you follow the Coach Beat Index, which is a fantastic account on Twitter that provides some context to these quotes, he said it was even worse if you listen to the whole press conference, Kyle. So what do you think? Dennis Allen, not too bullish on Kendre Miller's hamstring injury recurring here. Are you buying or selling Kendre Miller as he ices his hamstring in the training room?
Yeah, this is a pretty brutal quote, and sometimes you get these, and you just understand that it's not good for that player, and I definitely feel that way here. I will say it's funny because I think in episode 2 or 3 of the show, Kendre Miller was a player that was rising due to Kamara's contract issue, and that contract issue is still looming over everyone's heads. But the free fall for Kendre Miller is still starting. I'm still okay with buying him here, especially if he falls. Like if he's like you said at 180. That's totally fine. I mean, the premise for it is all the same. If he stays healthy and Kamara is banged up or hurt or doesn't sign a contract, it's still there. But it's definitely not a spot where I'm super bullish on drafting Kendre Miller. It's just more so if he continues to fall, I'll take some.
Yeah, Alvin Kamara was pulling a Marshawn Lynch. I'm just here so I don't get fined kind of
Yeah.
an answer to why he's at training camp and not holding out. So I thought that money's undefeated, Kyle. So I think with a lot of these situations, we will find suddenly Brandon Ayuk may actually start practicing. Okay, let's talk about Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson is part of a wide receiver room in Los Angeles that is not quite settled, at least as far as our predictive perspective in fantasy football. He's been dropping down the board as a result. There's been some reports that the beat writers expecting DJ Chark to be the wide receiver 3. That is, of course, speculation and not facts. We have seen Jim Harbaugh say something slightly to the opposite. They're expecting big things from Quentin Johnson. So which is it? Is DJ Shark going to be running the majority of the third wide receiver reps here, or can we expect Quentin Johnson to come out from his disappearing act of last year and actually do something?
So this is the prototypical quote that I love to see in training camp, because you just never really know what it means. Because, for example, this could have been a whole rant about something. The report could have mentioned somebody else, or the reporter could have flat out asked Justin Herbert about Quentin Johnson. And if that's the case, what is he going to say? We're not expecting big things from him this year. So like these kinds of quotes are ones that I don't really take a whole lot of water to. Yes, I'm sure they're expecting big things from all of their players, and especially all of their young guys. So now, in terms of how I feel about the Chargers situation, I am sort of, lukewarm on a lot of these guys. I like Josh Palmer quite a bit. And after that, it's pretty much a big jumbled question mark for me. Again, if Quentin Johnson falls to a point where it's like, he's just falling into my lap, then sure, I'll take him. But for the most part, Chark being there, McConkey's going to be involved, and this is going to be a very run-heavy team. So it's just kind of a situation where I'm a little bit nervous about the pass game in general, and Josh Palmer is kind of the guy that I've keyed in on for this Chargers team. So I wouldn't say it's a buy for Johnson, but if he falls, I don't mind getting some of him.
It's not impossible, but there's been easier to believe situations for a player that's going to win me $1.5 million than Quentin Johnson suddenly emerging in this offense to do something. But again, stranger things have happened. See Brock Purdy. Okay, so let's talk about our weekly topic this week, which is something we've basically been doing already, Kyle, which is week 1 training camp market influences. Now, when training camp starts, what we start to see is some of the things we've been talking about already. People are actually on site at training camps and they're observing what the team is doing versus speculating on what the team is doing. And that causes the fantasy football industry and the market in general for Underdog and DraftKings best ball to start moving. And what I want you to do is, as we talk about some key situations that have happened very early in camp, because again, we're recording this very early on a Thursday, very early in the camp season. So there could be things that develop even after we record this that could change things even more. But as it stands right now, how are you reacting to the following situations? First situation that I want to jump into is the Vikings quarterback situation. Now, most of the offseason, the speculation from the fantasy industry will be eventually we will see Sam Darnold take a seat and JJ McCarthy step up. However, the coaching quotes from camp have been short of full endorsements of JJ McCarthy. And instead, we've even seen some people like Justin Jefferson endorsing Sam Darnold. So that leaves the question very deep into your drafts. A lot of people like to take McCarthy as a second or third quarterback to sort of beef up the rest of their roster. Is this something that you're going to continue to do as you examine this Vikings situation?
Yeah, honestly, I've been pretty low on McCarthy in my drafts personally, and I don't know if I was necessarily intentional. I think maybe I just kind of lucked out a bit there, but I think this is definitely, and a couple of other quotes from Kevin O'Connell have sort of led me to think that there's a lot of room for Sam Darnold to potentially play more. And I think out of all the quarterbacks that were drafted outside of Michael Penix in the first round, that McCarthy was just naturally the guy who was most likely to get a redshirt year, right? And now I think if Sam Darnold plays well, he could potentially. I wouldn't really be surprised if he plays the majority, if not the entire year. Now, I do think there's a spot where at any sign of a throwback to Sam Darnold's Jets days, but any signs of him seeing ghosts, McCarthy could easily just step in there and take the job. So it's probably a spot where I'm not necessarily looking to get any more of JJ McCarthy, because I think that the question marks are even higher now with his playing time. But I still think it's going to be a situation that kind of develops over the course of the year.
Yeah, similar situation to what's happening in New England with Drake May. I think a lot of people are speculating that May is going to be able to step in there by the end of the season, that the team will be bad and they'll lose. But what happens if one of these teams accidentally starts winning, Kyle? That's the question. And certainly the Vikings could fit that bill, but we will have to see how things play out. But that's just, I think I'm with you there. I'm sort of shying away more from JJ McCarthy, especially than I was earlier in the offseason. Now, a person I'm shying a little bit more towards is Aiden O'Connell. Devontae Adams giving his endorsement. We're seeing him with the first team offense first in the 11-on-11s at camp. So the question is, with your very last pick or one of your very last picks, are you interested, willing, and able to take an Aiden O'Connell stack, which sounds funny to even say out loud?
I am, yeah, because I mean, in reality, Devontae Adams, yes, he's getting a little bit older. Yes, he had some down games last year, in my opinion, mostly due to Jimmy Garoppolo. But this helps you with potentially, adding another stack. If you can now feel a little bit better about drafting Devontae Adams just because of the certainty of it all, right? Sure, I don't think other options there would be poor, but it feels a little bit better in your head to draft a receiver knowing who the quarterback is. But then in general, just stacking with a guy like Brock Bowers. So I like grabbing some Bowers when I can, and now it feels better to be able to actually pair him up with the quarterback late in drafts. So this is something that I'm pretty happy about, and I'm excited about. Not I liked what we saw from O'Connell last year in the preseason, and then what we saw from him in the regular season as well. So I think he could be a decent quarterback in the league, and I think I don't mind stacking him up with some of these pass catchers here.
Okay, what about down in Carolina? Bryce Young looking to bounce back in a big way from his season last year. It did not go well, but they've got a new kid in town as far as wide receiver one, named Deontay Johnson. Uh, Certainly something that surprised me yesterday that I didn't really expect to see because I didn't remember it this way. Is he was actually a little bit more efficient with his targets last year in Pittsburgh than we've seen in previous years. And now we're getting reports that there's a good rapport between Bryce Young and Deontay Johnson. He's certainly somebody who can get open. The question is, do we think the quarterback's going to find him? And are you bullish or bearish on this connection between Young and Johnson?
I have no problem, taking this as a bullish effect for Deontay Johnson, but I'm still I still can't get to any sort of Bryce Young exposure here. There's just too many concerns there. What we saw from him last year. On the other token of this, there was a picture of him walking out of training camp with like a backpack on, and he's a smaller guy, and he was walking next to some bigger guys, and people thought he was like on his way to school. So that was a pretty funny training camp clip there. But yeah, no problem with Deontay Johnson. I do think he's going to have a pretty clear role in this offense. There are some guys behind him that might, develop a role, but the biggest thing for me and why I can feel confident about it is the coaching. Dave Canales, I think, is going to be able to do some big things here, and I think that Bryce Young is a guy who can be serviceable, and I might even have too much negative bias towards him because of last year, and there's a chance that he could be maybe even above average. So yeah, no problem with taking some hype with Deontay Johnson here.
Yeah, he's certainly not a big guy, but I don't think that that's a qualification as far as what they're looking for at the wide receiver position. In all cases, I think they're mostly just looking for you to get open, catch the damn ball. That's something he certainly can do. He even caught some touchdowns last year, Kyle. So maybe we'll actually, I don't know, it is Carolina, but maybe we'll see some actual touchdowns this year for Deontay Johnson. Okay, speaking of no touchdowns, the New England Patriots have a bunch of wide receivers that are all Spider-Men pointing at each other, right? Like you've got 7 veterans and 2 rookies, and there's a lot to unpack as it comes to trying to figure out the wide receiver situation in New England. So reports from camp that we are seeing is that Jalen Polk in the early going is starting to earn the trust of the coaches. Certainly someone that the beat writers feel is a lock to make the roster. But the question that I have for you is he is being drafted at an increasingly high level. I just saw him go at like 125 in a draft I did this morning, Kyle, which I thought was ridiculous. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, you tell me, where should we be drafting Jalen Polk? Are you a believer in him being able to step up and do some things in this offense by the end of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a non-believer. I would say it's just a spot where I'm not prioritizing it. I just think that if I'm going to be in on a team that I think is going to have a bad offense this year, it's going to be with guys like Demario Douglas and Ramondre Stevenson, who we've talked about quite a bit at the course of these shows. And for Jalen Polk, he was a fairly early draft pick here. So I wouldn't be surprised if he develops into a spot where he's the wide receiver 2, or maybe he's the number 1 outside receiver and DeMar Douglas is the inside guy. But I still think, like you mentioned, it's going to be a rotation here. And it's just not an offense that I think is going to be able to support a ton of, awesome fantasy options. So it's more so just kind of picking your poison. And for me, I would rather, plant my flag with DeMar Douglas or Ramondre Stevenson.
I hate to call it planting my flag, right? But Demario Douglas is getting drafted in this range of wide receivers where if you need a wide receiver, like you kind of just don't have much better of an option.
Yeah.
Like I mean, we're not going to talk about it here, but there's been reports that Bateman is performing well in camp. he's in that range, but it's basically being between just a couple of guys in what I would call the wide receiver dead zone at that area of the draft. So yeah, Polk is going before that. That's why I'm finding myself more on Douglas. But again, the situation is quite ambiguous. A lot to be seen here. I think the preseason will have a lot to say about what happens. But ultimately, Polk on paper with the up arrow in terms of what the coaches and the staff are saying. Okay, so the Philadelphia Eagles, it's very easy to name their wide receiver 1. It's A.J. Brown. It's also very easy to name their wide receiver 2, Devontae Smith. The question is, who is the Eagles wide receiver 3? And I would have given you 3 guesses, and you might not have gotten who's actually playing wide receiver 3 in the initial days of camp. So who is the wide receiver 3 for the Eagles in your mind, Kyle?
Dallas Goedert or Saquon Barkley, but
that's funny. It probably is Barkley, but no, in camp, we're seeing Paris Campbell lined up at wide receiver 3. Look, that's not as insane as I'm making it sound, but he's certainly been an underperformer in recent seasons. So to see him on the field early surprises me. What in the world are we doing with this information? He's probably not being drafted in your draft right now. Should he be?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, like, there's not really a ton of, huge talent guys around him outside of A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. Like, in terms of recognizable or noticeable names, there really isn't any. And you have to either talk about preseason days or college players for guys who you're interested in as, like, wide receiver 3 options. Like, you have Anaya Smith, a former Texas A&M guy, Austin Watkins, preseason MVP from last year, Johnny Wilson, Florida State guy. So it's not really surprising that Paris Campbell, won this job, especially after Devontae Parker retired. But the only thing is, I just don't think it's that plentiful of a role. We haven't really seen a wide receiver 3 role do anything in this Philadelphia offense. And I think you can even put more question mark into that this season with Saquon Barkley, who I'm expecting to be quite involved in the passing game. And obviously you have Dallas Goedert there as well. So I don't mind drafting him, at the end of drafts, if he's your last pick, just to say, hey, this is a guy who I'm getting a piece of who could potentially be a starter in an elite offense. But I don't think that the wide receiver 3 role for the Eagles is all that plentiful.
Well, let's be careful about the terminology. Won the job, right? It's day one. He's lined up out there, but Paris Campbell stinks. I'm going to come out and say it. I'm not drafting him. I'm never drafting him. And I don't care what he does. He stinks. So if you think that this situation that he is quote unquote won the job, I guess we'll see about that. I think the cream will rise to the top and it'll be literally anybody else. But again, that's just from a fantasy perspective that I'm talking. And the reason that I feel like I say he stinks is just because, like, something to the effect of what you said, there's just not that much opportunity here. And he's just not good enough to make it happen on his own. Okay, final player that I want to talk about. Well, I don't know if I want to talk about it, but we're talking about it. Zach Ertz. He is still alive and breathing. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Kyle. He's in Washington. And what we're seeing is that actually the reports on the role of rookie Ben Sinnott, who's been drafted most of the offseason as the tight end for the Commanders, not so fast. Looks like we're going to see Zach Ertz out there on third down, which makes a lot of sense. That's probably just about all he can do at this point in time. The question is, can he do it well enough to be on your fantasy team?
No, I don't think so. I'm going to pass on Zach Ertz. And I think that, again, it's tough to read too much into this quote because we don't know, what the question was that was asked. But when Dan Quinn implies he's not here to coach, it almost feels like he is here to coach because, like, nobody asked you that. And, last year it worked out great for the Cardinals. They had Ertz. They had a young guy with a ton of talent, Trey McBride. And this year, who knows if this was Washington's plan, but if it was, it might have worked out perfectly because you have another young guy with a ton of talent in Ben Sinnott and Zach Ertz potentially there to, not be able to play a whole lot, but maybe to, show him the ropes. And if it works out the way it did for Trey McBride, not saying, Ben Sinnott is Trey McBride, but yeah, I mean, it could definitely be worse spots where if Zach Ertz isn't going to play, he could kind of just be more like the figurehead, and Ben Sinnott is actually the tight end 1. So I definitely prefer Sinnott here, and I will not be drafting any Zach Ertz because I do think that he's there to coach or at least, teach up Ben Sinnott some things.
RotoGrinders.com, you can find some best ball rankings for free, $0, Kyle, on the RotoGrinders site. They're good. I use them all the time. Just go check them out. I mean, you can just download the CSV and put it right on Underdog, start drafting teams fairly quickly that have a good chance. Of course, if you want to sign up for a premium subscription, we're going to kick some people's asses here in the preseason coming up. And of course, you can do so in the regular season as well. For Kyle Murray, I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back again next week for Stonk Watch.